Hey guys, what's going on? I'm here with another 3 books. It is the 23rd week of the year, and I have read 22 books, so I'm nearly on schedule to complete my book a week reading challenge. This time around, the theme is comedy, but I'm not sure that's the right word for it. I have laughed out loud exactly one time while reading a book. It was Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy when they reveal what the meaning of life is. If you haven't read that one, you should. But with these 3 books, there's been plenty of chortles and plenty of exhales through the nose. Let's start with Lake Wobegon Days by Garrison Keillor. This book has been on my TBR for a very long time. I bet everyone has a book like this on their own TBR. My dad gave it to me like 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I think we were talking about comedy in books, and he recommended this one. And every time I went to my TBR to get a new book, I'd look at it, I'd say, oh, I should really read that one. And finally I did. And I encourage everyone out there, read that one book on your TBR. Just get rid of that nagging thought in the back of your head. That being said, I almost DNF'd this book. I got to page 40, and I think page 40 is the point in a book where I can comfortably say, okay, this isn't for me, I'm gonna try something else. But I got to page 40, and like I usually do, like a lot of people probably do, you go to Goodreads and you're looking for that that 3.1, and then you're looking for that 1-star rating that says, don't waste your time on this book, so that I'm affirmed and I'm justified in putting it down forever. But instead, I learned that Garrison Keillor is actually a radio personality. So I was thinking to myself, why am I reading a book by a radio personality? I got some free trial for the audiobook, and I had a lot of driving to do, and I ate it up. It was so much more enjoyable listening to this than reading it. I mean, the guy's voice is a drug. It hypnotizes you, which is kind of unfair. And I know listening to a book is completely different than reading a book, so we have to judge it with completely different metrics. But in any case, I enjoyed it. It's about a small fictional town in Minnesota called Lake Wobegon, and it's just these small little slice of life stories. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's sad, sometimes it's clever. My favorite story in here is the living flag, and they mention it on the back of the book, so I imagine it's a lot of other people's favorites as well. It's about this store owner who bought a bunch of red, white, and blue hats, couldn't sell them, so he convinced the town to host this event. Everyone goes and they wear the red, white, and blue hats, and they're organized so that from above they look like a big American flag. But of course everyone wants to see the flag, so they keep going up to the vantage point to see the flag, but of course the flag is incomplete because they're not part of it. And it kind of went into Vonnegut territory there for a minute, where I was wondering how deep the relevance of this goes, because you can really draw a lot about life from that scenario, right? A lot about people, a lot about groups of people. That was definitely the most clever story. The other ones are mostly about kids and how impressionable they are. They're getting scared by a grave digger with the story about how the person died, or about a little brother throwing a overripe tomato at his sister and getting in trouble for it. They're very nostalgic, but in the book, the guy says he doesn't like his writing to be described as nostalgic. But I'm sorry, man, it's nostalgic. I don't know what to tell you. Parts of the audiobook I listened to was the guy reading to a live audience, which really made me feel like a humorless bastard, because these people laughed at everything, and I was there, driving in my car, just stone-faced, as this audience was just eating it up, laughing, and I'm just like, I should find this funny, I guess this is funny, right? Here's my indicator. But it wasn't really. I mean, what I found most funny was the Minnesota accent, which really gave it a nice flavor, like Fargo. Have you ever seen the movie Fargo?
He says, oh, so I get it. So you think I'm some kind of jerk for asking, only you don't use the word jerk.
I understand.
Then he calls me a jerk, says last guy thought he's a jerk is dead now.
He definitely gets on organized religion in this book, which is kind of a weird mix with the rest of it. I mean, he's talking about small town America, the resistance to change, and what I imagine to be himself growing up in it, where he's questioning these things in a world that seems so concrete. But ultimately I did like it, and I would recommend the audiobook by the guy, Garrison Keillor. I can't recommend the written form. Next up we got Redshirts by John Scalzi, which I showcased in my outdoor reading video. The back claims that it's a ruin your underwear funny book, which I can confirm is untrue. It also compares the book to Philip K. Dick, which I questioned when I first picked up the book, but I think it earned it, actually. Just realizing it now, but I think it did earn that. I believe it won the Hugo, and normally they advertise the hell out of that on the cover, but it's not here. I think it won the Hugo, though. It's about a ship, much like the USS Enterprise, that goes off on all these spacefaring missions. And the main characters are the Redshirts. And if you haven't watched Star Trek, the Redshirts are the extras that go along with the main characters. And it's kind of understood that the Redshirts will die. The main characters never die, of course, but they need to bring along somebody that can die in the greater scope of the story. And these characters catch on, and they realize that they're Redshirts. They realize that they're not the main characters in this story, and they try and do something about it. And it goes through a lot of really interesting twists and turns. And it's got the Scalzi snark, which I think is the supposed comedy of the book, is his characters, which are always kind of sarcastic, which I think was a good shtick for your first couple of Scalzi books, but then afterwards you expect the sarcasm, and it doesn't become very novel, and it does get a little old after a while. For me. But I've been thinking about comedy in general, and it's kind of dangerous because when you really start to peel back the layers, you realize just this completely subjective, weird thing that if you look at too much, you kind of destroy. But at its essence, I think it's just something you don't expect. It's being confronted with something you don't expect. And Scalzi does this really well in Redshirts with the plot. It kind of messes with the fourth wall. It kind of breaks out of the scope of the story multiple times. You think he's broken out of the story and you can see the seams of it, but then he breaks out of those again. Scalzi is always very casually written. It's very digestible. And here he's got really cool concepts that keep you going. The characters do kind of get old after a while, but with the other forces involved here, it was a really enjoyable read. What really surprised me about this book was the end, and not the somewhat surprise ending that a book like this is inevitably going to have, but the epilogue. I actually got goosebumps reading the epilogue because it really ties into a lot of things emotionally, and it gives a lot of depth to the book, which made me feel really arrogant after reading this because I was ending it thinking that was very light. There wasn't a lot of nutritional value, very entertaining, very enjoyable, but I don't think it's going to stick with me. And then in the epilogue, it kind of highlights some aspect of the story and how it relates to, fate and nihilism even, and how to combat nihilism, which is something I'm always looking for and something that's so hard to get. You do have to have a pre-existing understanding of sci-fi tropes, but I have a feeling anybody watching this video is going to be part of that club. And lastly, the book I enjoyed the most, hard to beat, Kurt Vonnegut, The Sirens of Titan, which I was really surprised to learn was only his second novel, because it was so fully Vonnegut that you'd think it would be a later one once he's kind of refined his style, but apparently he knew it from the start. It follows the richest man in the world, Malachi Constant, whose name means messenger, so he's always anticipated that he will carry a great message. So from the beginning, you're promised an answer to a big question, which with Vonnegut you would assume, what is the meaning of life? He's going to answer the meaning of life in this book, which was a pretty good hook. He hits all his usual targets like organized religion and the military. I think one of his main ideas here was the fact that you have to be open to being manipulated. You have to be open to being used, is how he puts it, which is something I struggle with. I'm always on high alert because there's such a negative connotation to being manipulated. Just that word. Maybe I need to move on from that word. But to be influenced, that one's getting a little dirty as well. And how long can we just cycle through words? Because it's a hard pill to swallow. It can't really be denied that everything in my head came from another person's head. That's life. Life is people exerting their influence over me and me exerting my influence over other people. What Vonnegut says, and what he said in most of his other books, is that the goal of life, what we're doing here, is just trying to exert ourselves over other people in a kind way. We're trying to love other people. We're trying to make people's lives easier. Like the answer so often is, it's about balance, and it's about not being closed off to all manipulation, but still being open enough to be influenced in a positive way. Like here's a good example. There's bird food out there which claims to be designed for songbirds. So instantly I'm thinking, that makes a really nice product. That's something that people want. But in reality, do all songbirds have the same dietary requirements? Probably not, so I'm just being manipulated. But if I just allowed myself to be manipulated and to think that I was attracting more songbirds, and since the world is a completely random place, maybe more songbirds will come, maybe they won't, but I won't have this negative force in my head that is blocking me from enjoying things. There still needs to be a filter there, and that's the balance you have to strike. That's like the yin and the yang. It's what I struggle with. I'm a man of extremes, so I'm always happy to get a reminder. Vonnegut did that here. The other balance Vonnegut's talking about is the balance between order and chaos. Because ultimately, the world is irrational. Philip K. Dick will tell you that. Vonnegut will tell you that. Maybe even Garrison Keillor will tell you that. But as a person, I want order in my life. And sometimes I can convince myself that I don't need order, but then I find myself out in a garden weeding. And I'm thinking, well, what is this? This is me in a totally unwinnable battle against chaos. But I'm out here. I'm doing it because I'm a human. I want order, but I have to be okay with chaos because ultimately the world is irrational and I have to be able to accept that irrationality because I can't control it all. Not every negative aspect of life is a weed that I can pull out. I have to fight chaos because that's what it is to live. But I still have to be okay with it because it will always be a part of my life. It will always rule my life, ultimately. So, anyways, typical post-Vonnegut musings, I think. Really enjoyed this one. The cover is absolutely beautiful. This is why I think I'm going to start collecting this edition, just because of this one. Which is not hard, because I already have most of them. Anyways, I was going to sell them, but no, those are going on my shelf now. And if you've read The Sirens of Titan, what do you think? I never go to Goodreads when I finish a book. I want to give my ideas some time to firm up, but there's a lot of room for interpretation there. What did you get out of it? I'm curious. 3 great books. I never laughed out loud. Would I consider them funny? Glad I read them. Think I'm going to do a Vonnegut tier list pretty soon. That one may challenge Cat's Cradle and Slaughterhouse-5 for the top 2. Yeah, I think it might. So as always, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.